Good morning to you all on a lovely, I was going to say summer's morning, but we're cracking on towards October now, but it's a sort of summery week that's popped up from nowhere, so I thought I need to get out, do a walk, and we're going to do Helpston today, which I've been putting off because it's rammed full of history, and I thought, no, I can't take all that on, but I'm going to have a go. I'm going to have a stroll, see what we can find. A lot of John Clare stuff, but I'm not going to make this a John Clare video. I'm a bit of an ignoramus on that front, so he's going to pop up without a doubt. And but there's plenty of other history around the village, so we'll see what we can make of it. We're doing a bit of green before we hit the village, just to sort of warm me up. This is Royce wood, actually Rice wood. It's known as Rice wood on current maps, R-I-C-E, but in John Clare's days, 1700s, 1800s, it was Royce wood, and it was named by him after a family in Helpston by the name Royce. And yes, they were related to the not directly but distant relatives of one half of Rolls-Royce, and that was the name of the wood in Clare's days, and he makes reference to it in some of his latter day poems when he was talking about parts of Helpston that he missed badly when he lived elsewhere. And Royce wood was one of his patches, and he missed it. He loved the trees, he loved the birds, the flowers and everything. So we're walking in John Clare's wood here. Why it changed to Rice from Royce, heaven only knows. I can only assume someone said that's called Royce and I wrote it down as Rice. There's no other logical explanation that links one half of Rolls-Royce with curry and rice, as it were. So but that's where we are. We're in Royce wood and we're heading towards the southern edge of Helpston. Certainly a lovely wood. Helpston, in case you're interested, I normally label all these villages as sort of Anglo-Saxon agricultural villages. This one, I mean, they found Roman bits and bobs throughout the village, so it goes back beyond Anglo-Saxon days to at least Roman days, and probably beyond. And it is agricultural. I mean, I think I read somewhere there were 8 or 9 different farms in Helpston as recently as about 100 years ago, so it's kind of a big farming hub really. A lot of farmsteads here, which I'm sure we'll pick up within the village. In fact, I found very little evidence of the sort of butchers, bakers, candlestick makers type premises here really. I think it really was an agricultural village, but it had a railway, which kind of doesn't really go with that, but it's all part of its history. It's got a railway and a few interesting bits and bobs wrapped around the railway as well. So yeah, it's an interesting village and not one I've really made a whole lot of sense of, to be honest with you. Right, I think we're coming out of the woods now onto Broadwheel Road, it should be. Otherwise I'm already lost. I tend to find Helpston's quite a conglomeration of new houses, newish houses, late 1900s houses, with the odd vintage 300-400-year-old house that just sort of pops up in amongst them all. You never quite know what's coming next here. You can never switch off and think, well, this is all modern, because as you'll see in a minute, yeah, there's some gems hidden away. Starting to move now from fairly recent stock into significantly older stock. Probably means the road at one point ended about here and there's just a farm track behind us before they developed it. Some lovely cottages, of which there'll be many in Helpston, I can assure you. Quite helpfully, they've got a date stone on that one. April Cottage, 1849. Tinderbox Cottage, 1700s. It's a long time ago. Now on this grass verge here was the main water supply, water source, should I say, from about, I think it was late 1890s to about 1950s, and there's a manhole cover now that covers it up because it was an artesian well. Which one of these two is it? It's that one. I can still hear it. Yeah, there used to be an artesian well here, which meant the water came out under its own force, and it was the main water source until 1950s when they had mains water delivered here. Lovely little cottage, 1789, marked on the walls there. And a lovely GR postbox in the wall as well. 1910 to 1936, that postbox was installed at some point. King George. We'll see a few of these on our tour. Converted barns. I love my ventilation holes, and these are square. It's like play school. We'll see some non-square ones on the route. Lovely old arch there, goes back to 1600s. That window's 1600s, the rest of it's 1800s. A mixed bag. And this is 1700s, used to be 2 cottages, now 1. What a hell of a one. And it's sold. I was going to buy that. Lovely. The 1600s, 1700s era thatched cottage, very nice. Believed to have been a toll house once, which makes sense as it's on a junction. Doesn't look like a toll house, but I'm told it probably was. One of a few former pubs over there, I think I'm right in saying. Used to be the Royal Oak, opened in the 1830s, closed 1929. I think the building goes back to about the 1700s. I don't know which bit of it was the Royal Oak. One bit was. Well, there's your answer, because it says by the door Royal Oak Cottage. That used to be the Royal Oak pub. Look at the ventilation holes on that old barn, which still is a barn, I think. Dates to the 1700s. Part of the Woodgate Farm complex. Woodgate Farmhouse is the building next to it, sort of sideways on. That actually goes back to 1600s. So that is a seriously old one. Very nice. Well, you know what that is. That's John Clare's cottage where he was born. Dates back to the 1600s, 1700s, whatever. John Clare born 1793 and lived a big chunk of his life here. I think it was his first 40 years. I know it's all been done up now as a museum. I think I read somewhere it used to be 4 or 5 different cottages all brought together a long time back. It's hard to imagine. Yeah, that's where it all started. For John Clare, as it were. Get a better view with the sun behind me. Right, going to head down Glinton Road now, down towards the railway crossing. Togood Close. Mr. Togood was the chap who set up one of the biggest, in fact the biggest, commercial operation within Helpston, which was Arborfield paper mill. An Arborfield paper mill is on our left, or was on our left, coming up, and I can't remember the exact date it was established, but I think it was the mid 1800s, just beyond the mid 1800s, and I think it was going until quite late into the 1900s, and then they sold up. But it's still a paper mill. I say paper mill, I don't know what a paper mill is really. They make paper, but they still make paper here now, just under a different name. So whether they were the people that bought Arborfield mill, I don't really know. There used to be a waterway that ran under a bridge just up here that supplied a lot of the water to the mill. I think it's called Ram Dyke, and I think it's been culverted and now runs underneath this road, pretty much into the yard on the left here. I think we're just coming up to the entrance to what was Arborfield paper mill. You notice there's two manhole covers in the road. I have a suspicion that's where Ram Dyke runs, under the road in a culvert with a couple of manhole covers there. That's my hunch. Can't see any reason why there would be two aligned covers like that, but I'm pretty sure that's where Ram Dyke ran. And as you can see, it's now BPS, Budget Paper Supplies Limited. And again, I don't know if these buildings were here as part of the Arborfield setup. I suspect they were. Building on the right is the most fantastic building that is unlisted I think I've ever seen. It's the Stationmaster's house for Helpston Station, which was just before the barriers on the right, long since gone. But that Stationmaster's house is magnificent. It really is. It can't be anything else. Architecturally beautiful, in my opinion. And as I say, it's not listed. Crazy. The station would have been in there where those trees are in the background there, right alongside what was at the time the Midland Railway lines. So yeah, that would have been the yard for the station, car park, call it what you will. And yeah, the station would have been pretty much botted up to the crossing and into those trees, and a stunning station it was in terms of its appearance. Small but stunning, as you'll see from the pictures. While I'm waiting, which will probably be for an age, the reason I'm heading down here is to see that building on the left there, which used to be the railway hotel. And again, lovely architecture. Fits very nicely with both the station and the station master's house. And it was still running until I think 1958, 59, sometime around then. It was more of a pub I think by then than it was a hotel. Just seems amazing a small agricultural settlement like Helpston had such a lavish looking hotel. You'd just think, you know, where would the business come from? But yeah, railways were a big thing in the mid 1800s when that was built. It was built at the time the line was built. Yeah, it's a lovely building. Right, let's go. I'm impressed I got over without the alarms going off. Made it. The crossing used to have two sets of gates, one on this side for the Great Northern Railway and one on the far side for the Midland Railway, and the bit in the middle, which is still there, you could get stuck in. If you got through one set of gates and not the other, you'd get stuck in the middle, which was bad enough in a car, but when you had horse-drawn carriages, that was not a good place to be, with express steam trains zooming past front and back. It had a bad reputation and eventually it was turned into what it is now, but it took a long time. It's fairly recent. There's a lot of accidents here in that time, and I think they dragged their heels somewhat in getting it sorted. Can't really get a good view of the old hotel, but you can see it's got some serious age to it. But so you don't when the railway opened in the mid 1800s. And the signal box also dates back to when the line first opened. Right, we're going to make another run. Very nice. Going back to the station, it was a Midland Railway station. It had unique access to Helpston, as it were, because the GNR said, look, you can have the railway station. We won't compete. Excuse me a second. Yeah, we won't compete. You can have the station as long as you let us use it to bring materials up to help us build our line across the other side. So it's a sort of mutually beneficial deal that was struck. So it was a Midland Railway station, and a very nice one too. Sorry about the traffic, can't do much about it. That's a cracking building, that is. How can that not be listed? I think it just fell the wrong side of the date at which they got a bit stricter on listing buildings, or not, as the case may be. Belter. Right, let's head back to Helpston. Strange place to have a postbox in the middle of nowhere. King George postbox. This means it dates to somewhere between, well, during his reign, 1910 to 1936. Very nice. Don't know how old some of these buildings are. They're not that recent. I know the guy who ran Arborfield Mill, he owned a lot of the properties down here. Whether he bought them for the people who work there, I don't know. I know his name is linked to many of these properties. There's a lot of similarities between this group of four. In fact, they're all identical. Coming back to the centre of the village now, an unmistakable building on the left there, which is the old village school. Opened in 1858, and it says 1856 on the wall, but I think it opened in 1858, but we'll go with 56, that's good by me. And closed in 1965 when the new school opened at the other end of the village, and that's still open today. So I'm not sure what's happening with it now. Not a lot by the looks. I presume that was the head teacher's house on the right, schoolmaster's house, as they tended to build alongside these early schools. Still looks like it's good to get inside there actually. Looks like it's got all the fittings and whatever that used to be there. No one's touched it. House coming up on the left with the porch. Used to be the Parting Pot pub. Another closed pub. Closed in 1957. Still carries the name. The Parting Pot. Unusual one. Name that is. Nice old phone box there. This was put in 1938, I read somewhere. Now a library by the looks. The buildings alongside us are cart sheds dating to the 1700s. Obviously been done up and no longer containing carts. I think the entrances to it were in the right round the back, or they're down the side here. Looks like they might have been down the side. Right, onto Maxey Road. Nice tidy thatch on that one, which is Cromwell House. And that one dates back to about, I think, 1650, 1658, I think rings a bell. Very tidy. Whitewashed thatch there is Vine Cottage, which dates back to the early 1700s. And I think the one next to it, which is Virginia Cottage, outdates it by 100 years and goes back to the 1600s. A couple of oldies. And at Church Lane, triangular ventilation slot on that old barn. Don't see many of those. I'm a bit of a ventilation spot geek myself. That's Wisteria House on the right, dates the 1600s. Doesn't look it, but it does. And it has a wisteria. And you'll all know what this house is here. Well, it isn't a house, it's a public house. Was a public house, that's the Exeter Arms. As was. Closed in 2012. I think I've had a few beers in there. I think it dates back to the early 1700s, but then there's other records saying it used to be a courthouse in the 1500s, but whether that was a previous building, I don't know. I don't think it goes back to the 1500s. I think it's a sort of late 1700s, early 1800s type building. But yeah, soldiered on for a few years, but gave up in the end. Still a lovely building, but no longer a pub. It's a lovely building coming up hidden in the trees here, which was the old manor house, or a old manor house. I think there's more than one. Again, it's a magnificent looking building, even though we can't see much of it, but it's not listed. It doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah, well hidden away, but it's a magnificent building. How can that not be listed? Right, the Church of St Botolph. It's a bit of an irony here with this manor house behind me not being listed. This wall in front of us is listed, dates to 1700s. In fact, they reckon the archway here, and particularly the uprights of the archway, date back to 1400. And they are listed as well. I suppose they should be. They look like they've been added from somewhere, to be honest with you. Probably part of an earlier church, maybe. That's probably a silly guess, but yeah. Predates the wall. An old church. It actually, most of it dates back to the 1200s, so just shortly after the Norman period. But it's believed it or a predecessor was here at least to Anglo-Saxon times, as was the case with many of these sort of Norman era churches. There was something here before, but there's apparently some evidence, questionable evidence, of Anglo-Saxon architecture, if I can find it. We shall have a look. It's also where John Clare was buried, so we shall find that as well. Always nice to be able to get into these churches. Strange place to have a door at some point. That looks slightly Norman in style. I won't say it is definitely, but the decoration above the arch looks a bit suspect. Yeah, it's not untypical of Norman arches to have that sort of decoration above them. And it is a broadly rounded arch as well, so that could well be a Norman or late Norman arched window. It's very deep, and I don't know what the history is behind that, because that could almost be Anglo-Saxon, and I suspect they may well be wherever they were found, now resting on that windowsill. Always love these doors that tend to go up towards the bells, because they're always, I mean, half the population today wouldn't get in there. I mean, the doorway's only about 2 foot wide. I'm sure there's a reason for that. Again, there's more of that decoration, or different sort of decoration above. So I apologise for not doing my homework on this church. I didn't really think I'd get in. If I did, I might have swatted up a little bit on what's what. As I say, it's very close to Norman period, so there could easily be bits and bobs of Norman architecture in here. Always love the doors in these churches, especially if they're original, and that's undoubtedly original. Just the locking mechanisms and those keys. They probably do date back to pretty much near the beginning. Probably crafted by a blacksmith in the village, as is usually the case. Another blocked door. Quite a lot of re-engineering over the years, this one. Oh, look, another ordnance survey benchmark on a church of all places. Keep finding these. Probably going out of my depth a little bit here, but there are references to parts of this wall having evidence of Anglo-Saxon architecture, what they call long and short work, which I suspect refers to this sort of stuff in front of us. Here we have a long piece and a short piece, but I could be totally getting this wrong, but I suspect this little bit of wall here is what they're referring to as evidence of Anglo-Saxon architecture, on top of which more recent stuff has been built. Could be wrong, but I'll go for that. It's certainly unusual, and I have seen similar to this before on other churches. A lovely building there with the old eaves halfway up the side of the house. That's College Farmhouse, formerly Rectory Farm. Originally dates back to the 1400s, which is old, but it's been significantly remodelled. But even then, only in the 1700s, so it's an old building right next to the church. Lots of sort of ghost windows and ghost lintels all over it. There you go, with the immortal words, "A poet is born, not made." That is the grave of John Clare. (1864). He was buried here in the village he loved. Can't read what's on there, but I suspect that's probably lines from one of his poems, but maybe not. I can't read that. Rest in peace, young man. Most of the gravestones are impossible to read, but there's an interesting one down here. Richard Royce and Elizabeth Royce, and this would have been the family after which Royce Wood was named after, and were related to one half of Rolls-Royce. As you probably know, I like to try and grab a grave and look into the person concerned, but it's very difficult here because most of them are very, very hard to read, and I need the detail to look into them. That one might be the winner at a struggle. Francis Jackson. I can't read that because I can't get a date. I need a date. Move on. I first came across the name John Clare. Well, I'd heard the name being passed around by people, but it meant nothing to me until I was looking up information about Swaddywell, because I spend a lot of my time in the summer chasing wild British orchids. It's one of my hobbies. Another one of my YouTube channels, and his name cropped up, and because Swaddywell was one of his spots that he loved to meander around. It was one of those that he wrote poems about or featured in his poems, and that's when I first came across the guy and read a little bit about him. I'm absolutely not an expert on John Clare, but I've read enough to know that he and I kind of shared a lot of common interests, as in, you know, wild places, hay meadows, unspoilt lands, and I also share his frustrations that he had even then, back in the early 1800s, for land being spoilt. You know, he didn't like the impact of the early days of the Industrial Revolution on the lands that he loved, and I can identify with that. I'd hate to think what he would make of 2024, but there you go. So yeah, I've always had an interest in him without necessarily delving too much into his poems, but yeah, very ordinary guy. You know, he worked hard, never had too much money until his books started to sell, and then he was flitting down to London and back and trying to balance the world of that he loved, really, up here in Helpston, with a world that must have been very strange to him down in London. And I think it was that sort of contradiction, that sort of clash, that eventually drove him crazy. He spent the latter years of his life in asylums. He died in an asylum in Northampton and was only brought back here the day before. He was buried here in this churchyard. I think he spent the night before his burial stored at the Exeter Arms, if that's the right expression, before being brought here. And yeah, so a very ordinary guy, fascinating guy. Could not deal, I think, with, as I say, the sudden lurch from the place that he loved and the place that he wrote his poems about, to suddenly being in the sort of high commerce world of selling books and whatever. So he just wasn't ready for that. But yeah, fascinating guy, well worth reading about if you've got spare time. There are plenty of websites that will tell you a hell of a lot more than I can about John Clare without even having to read any of his poems. But some of his poems are good. I recommend having a go at some of them, definitely. Might be able to read that one. It's about the only one in the entire churchyard that I've got close to. Can I read it? In memory of. No, I can't read that. Can you? S-A-R. No, I can't. Sarah. I'm going to have a go at it. I'm going to have to study that on my computer, but it looks like Sarah something or other. And I could see a date of 1861, I think. It could be 67, I think it's 61, 1861, age 48 years. That'll give me something to go on. See if we can find a little bit out about Sarah. That's another one. I can read that. Elizabeth French. Daughter of John and Jane Bain. I think John Bain is next door. Go back to Elizabeth, who departed this life May the 5th, 1862, aged 45 years. I will find something out about young Elizabeth French. Why would they have steps going up there? They look like they've been there a while. Maybe not. Unusual. Right, there's a memorial here to John Clare, no less. I think it was put up on the year of his death, if I remember rightly. Got lines from his poems. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was put up in 1864 when he died. It's got some age to it. The wonderful James Bradford Almshouses, built in 1907. Died as Sir James Bradford. Yeah, died as Sir James Bradford, but made his money in railways, and he started life as a porter at the station at Helpston. That's a hell of a rise. At the end of it, he was trading railway companies, but he put some money into these almshouses for the less well-off in the village. Magnificent houses they are too. This old wooden building, the Helpston Village Hall, actually dates back to about 1919, 1920, just after the First World War. And it ain't going to be here much longer because the lease ran out 2020, but it's been extended to 2025. It belongs to the Milton estate and they want the land back, so come back in 5 years' time, this will be gone. They're building a new village hall, supposedly. I think on Heath Road, if I remember rightly, but yeah, this dates back to the end, just after the end of the First World War. A lot of memories contained in this one, but it's going to be levelled soon. That one with the 1871 date stamp on the top used to be a primitive Methodist chapel, now known as the Old Chantry, but yeah, it used to be a pretty big Methodist chapel. Closed in 1965. Now all these buildings up here are listed. The first one, known as the Feathers, you might guess was a pub, and it was the Prince of Wales Feathers. I think it's quite an old one. I think it's been closed for quite a while, might be wrong, but it was once a pub. Next door you've got Home Farmhouse, late 1700s. It's got a date stamp of 1785 in the middle building. It's got a date stamp of 1872 on the next one, which is a separate cottage, number 9. And 1779 next door, which is Hollyburn House. That green plaque underneath the date stamp is an old fire insurance plaque. You had to have one of them if you wanted the fire brigade to come out and look after your house and to prove it was insured. Prove it was insured by the company that were going to come out and save it. And the thatch there, 1600s, 1700s, old. And the little tiddler next door, number 19, which is seriously cute. Early 1800s. There's two knocked into one here, even though they look like two still. The thatch is the old part, obviously. That dates to the 1600s. And the non-thatch, Wind in the Willows, 1800s. The Methodist chapel coming up, still in use, non-conformist Methodist chapel. Well, I think it's still in use. It's obviously used as a scout and guide centre as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's still a Methodist church or not. It may be. I like the bit at the top where it says United Methodist something church, and they put free on, which has been clearly added later. In fact, I think United has been added as well. Don't know what it used to say beforehand, but it's been modified. Queen's Head House. Now I know there was a Queen's Head pub. Does that look like a pub? Because I couldn't find where it was last night. That might be a good clue as to that was the Queen's Head. As was. It looks like a pub, doesn't it? Apologies to the house owners if it never was, and I'm calling a house something that looks like a pub, but yeah, I think it probably was. None of these houses are listed, otherwise I could tell you what they were. Now this one is listed, Forge Cottage, 1700s. Now if I was named Forge, you'd think it was a blacksmith's, but I can find no evidence on old maps that it was a blacksmith's. But would they call it Forge Cottage if it wasn't? One of the biggest houses in the village, Helpston House, no less. On the left, just hidden over that hedge, it's hard to get a view of it. In part dates back to the 1500s, that one. It's had various names in the past. I think Lolland Bridge Farm, Manor Farmhouse. Well, most farmhouses seem to be called Manor Farmhouse. It doesn't mean too much. But known today as Helpston House. Very grand. Trying to get a sneaky pic through the doorway. Gateway, sorry. Nice carriage entrance there, as it would have been. That's very nice. Helpston House. I was trying to work out in a week how far back, this building goes, the village stores. It always seems to be on maps going back some distance as either a post office or a store or shop or something, so I think it's got some age on it. Now the sun's gone in, I could probably get some better shots of what's lurking on Woodgate, and that'll be the back of the old vicarage, as they called it, the old vicarage farmhouse, in which very few vicars ever stayed. It's curious that the Bluebell sign has a bell on one side. And the girl with bluebells on the other side. Can't make my mind up where the name comes from. Pebble dash with ventilation holes. I know I've explained these before, but these holes in the barns were literally for ventilation, because if you didn't have ventilation and they had straw and whatever inside, apparently it could get very combustible if it got damp. Can't really work that one out, but I'm assured that was the case. You needed these ventilation slots, otherwise they would spontaneously combust. Right, that's Helpston ticked off. Yeah, one of the reasons I always put it off was the history is plentiful, but it's pretty dense. It's sort of you go down some roads and you've got like 6 properties are all listed side by side, and I'd like to spend a bit more time on each one, but I can't really. There's people out, you know, in their gardens on a day like this, walking their dogs, painting their fences, cutting their perennials down or whatever they're doing. I can't stand outside. I mean, some of them are okay with it, some of them just think, what the hell's he up to, sort of thing, and he looks suspicious, which I probably do. So maybe I'm just too self-conscious, but anyway, did the best I can. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you enjoyed some of it. Thank you very much indeed for joining me and coming along, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, then please do. That little button in the corner makes a big difference to me. It just gives you a notification if there's any more videos that come up later and you don't miss them. That's all it is. But as I say, thanks for joining me. I will get out again sometime soon while the weather is good. Oh, I nearly forgot. Any comments you want to make about today, whack them underneath the video, either on YouTube or Peterborough Images. Always appreciate feedback of any sort or explanations of any sort. Always grateful for that. So please make the effort. Otherwise, as I say, I will see you again sometime, probably in the sunshine, he said, hopefully and optimistically. See you again.